Racist officers detain black family at resort, only to discover the father's an FBI agent. A family vacation at a fancy resort rapidly becomes a nightmare when racist police officials decide they don't belong. The father is unfairly imprisoned in front of his family, not knowing the man they are arresting is an FBI agent. Tell me what happens when the truth surfaces. Subscribe to the channel and track the development of this narrative. In the comments where you are observing from the Parker family had been looking forward this holiday for months. Veteran FBI agent Luke Parker hardly had time to savor quiet times with his family. His work required him to always be ready. Often, this caused anxiety in his personal life. Lena, his wife, is a well-known attorney driven by justice, battled for the rights of underprivileged groups. Their lives were always hectic, but this time they both choose to set aside time for the vacation at a posh location to spend with their children. Beachside resort where the sky opened out clear and soft waves hit the coast. And blue Luke laid on a sun lounger near the pool sporting sunglasses and shorts, savoring the taste of freedom he so seldom tasted at that same moment, together with the fresh air. Lena felt only lightness as stresses appeared to vanish. She looked sophisticated and tranquil, but deep inside, she was engaged in a book she hadn't had time to complete for weeks. Lena realized she needed this getaway to momentarily ignore the concerns of her employment. Their two children, Jackson and Emily. Jackson, a tall and mature 12-year-old, regularly challenged his shallow end of the pool. Swimming speed against Emily, his 7-year-old sister, a lovely curly brown-haired child with a brilliant. Luke felt satisfaction as both children laughed, their joy resonating through the peaceful resort. Observing these events, he experienced the tranquility he had been yearning for so long, a rare opportunity where he felt really present for his family, free from concern for unresolved problems or emergency chores. But not everything was as flawless as it first appeared. As Luke reached for a cool drink on the table next to him, he saw the man wore a dark polo shirt and stood tall and radiating authority when a security guard came from a distance. His expression stayed civil. His eyes showed obvious unease and mistrust. He moved forward and halted before the Parker family. "Sir," the guard said. His voice was strong and somewhat cold. "I must confirm that you are a guest here." Luke sat up, gently lowered. Lena threw down his sunglasses and stared the man in the eye. "I am a guest here," he answered coolly and without hesitation. Her book was staring at Luke, knowing something was odd. Not the first they had been treated this manner, but each time it brought a new wave of tiredness. The guard grinned, but Luke said remained calm. Smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's just procedure. I need to know your room number." "Room 3305. We arrived yesterday." The guard nodded but stayed in place. I would want to verify with the front desk. Lena sat here, and this is protocol." Her keen eyes swiftly saw the problem. She was looking at Luke, and they both knew what was happening straightforwardly. Lena asked a courteous but forceful question to the guard about what is happening. Hesitated slightly, but kept his professional tone. "Ma'am, it's just normal." Luke sighed. He was all too knowing these techniques. This wasn't the first time his family and he had received unusual treatment in a posh establishment. Places. He turned to Lena, whispering gently, "Let them check." Lena gave him a knowing glance. Look, but she couldn't hide her annoyance. Even though this was meant to be a family trip, they both knew the mood had changed. As the guard left, Luke tried to remain cool, hoping this would soon be over. Deep down, though, he knew this was only the start of a stressful series of events. Luke and Lena tried to unwind, but Lena had totally lost the happy mood of the holiday and dropped her book down, her eyes now staring at. Walking fast toward the family with a colleague, the guard returning with another man seemed more sober. None of the first civility. Lena sat straight, her keen eyes sharp, while Luke sensed the strain building around them. "Sir," the first guard started, his voice now more strong, as if he had already formed his opinion. "We require you and your family to leave the pool area till we verify your information with the front desk." Luke sat up gently, his eyes never straying from the guard. "As I have spoken, we are in. If you wish to verify room 305, phone the front desk. There is no need to." His voice stayed calm, even though Lena's rage was growing inside her. got up next, not able to hide her annoyance. I'm not sure why. We have responded to all of your inquiries. Why are you requesting us to leave? Her voice crisper, now sharp and full of protest. The guard averted Lena's eyes, trying to keep his professionalism as he approached Luke. Once more, we had some. Lately, non-guests have been breaking into the pool area. This is only a security measure to guard the resort's property. We have to abide by. His tone seemed cold and detached. Lena's clearly feeling the injustice, brow wrinkled. She moved forward, her voice even more sharply. What is the actual problem here? We have obviously mentioned our room number, and you still wonder why we seem different than the others. People here, are your policies applied to everyone, or only to families similar to ours? The guard hesitated, but still tried to maintain his stern count. Man, it's not. He responded, what, you think we're just ensuring the resort's security? Yet his tone clearly showed unease. Luke rested a hand on Lena's shoulder, trying to quell her mounting wrath. He knew her emotions all too well. He was hiding the same resentment he had seen and experienced many like circumstances, but each time left. His fresh annoyance went beyond mere distrust from the sight of strangers to the suffering of being assessed by. Appearance, it's good, Lena, Luke said gently, trying to keep things under control. Let them verify with the front desk. But a younger guard with taking a confident stance, he crossed his arms over his chest and spoke in a demanding manner. We have experienced many folks who sneak in here who weren't visitors. Don't believe we are specifically targeting your family. This is just our. That sentence angered Lena. She stood squarely in front of the young guard, no longer able to keep her calm. Not personal, then why are you so hard pressing us? You are scaring my children and nasty us over a process you're using as an excuse, Lena said, her voice sharp, her eyes flashing. Luke's enraged attempts to stop the situation from spinning out of control talked once more, his tone still calm but more forceful. We have addressed all your questions. If you like to confirm, phone them. There's no need to escalate this. His voice stayed constant. Yet, his eyes clearly showed frustration. The younger guard gave a small smile, but it was a mocking one. We are just doing our jobs, man. Shrugged. If you have a problem you can discuss with our manager, Lena. She was used to locking eyes with the guard, not backtracking. In the courts, conflicts like these arise. This time, she was a lawyer representing someone else rather than defending someone else. Wife, a mother, and she refused to let her family be subjected to this. Before Lena could say anything else, Luke softly drew her back, staring squarely at the guard. You have requested us for our room number, we responded. Kindly check with the front desk. I will not let you keep. This kind of harassment of my family caused the tension to be more than usual. Jackson and Emily had been enjoying just minutes earlier were suddenly quiet, Jackson's worried eyes fixed on Luke's face as he approached. Confused dad, Luke went down softly, resting a hand on his son's shoulder, trying to grin reassuringly. It's nothing, kid. Just a small misinterpretation. Go back and play. I'll take care of this with Emily. Deep down, he understood the matter may become bad right away, if not managed. The original guard seemed anxious, discreetly gazing at the other guests around the tension. A couple of them had even pulled out their phones. Several were beginning to pay attention across at the Parker family. I'll check with the front desk, recording the scene, but no one intervened. They merely watched from distances. The first guard immediately said, trying to remain professional but obviously losing confidence, kindly wait. Here Luke sighed, pushing back the irritation and tiredness, but yet projecting calm. Lena, different, her keen eyes stayed fixed on the two guards, reluctant to allow anything pass by. In minutes, things became worse when a group of guards came again, this time escorted by two local police officials. The calm around the pool became strained as stern faces headed straight at the Parker family. While some of the surrounding visitors stopped what they were doing, some whispering, some kept filming the sight on their phones. A big police officer guiding the group toward Luke, a strong voice. We reported an incident here. Even though Luke was not involved, I still need to see your identity. Acclimated to tough situations in his area of business, a feeling of wrath rose in his chest. He got up slowly, looking at the officer, not displaying any concern on his face. I have already discussed this with the security guards, my family. "We are here as authorized guests sitting in room 305, Luke stated unequivocally. "I am Luke Parker, an FBI agent," and the police was not astonished, as we had done nothing illegal or polite. When Luke said he was an FBI agent instead, he just nodded and gestured over your ID. Lena jumped to her feet, her eyes flashing with rage. "My husband just told you he's an FBI agent. You have no justified cause for harassment of us like this." Her voice exuded power and determination. "You have no right to treat us like intruders, particularly in front of our children." The officer did not bother looking at Lena. His attention stayed just on Luke, his hand hovering close to his belt where his shackles hung. "Hand over your ID now, else we will have to follow procedure." Luke held his cool. Mindful of how rapidly events like these may turn into violence, he gently removed his wallet. He handed the officer his FBI badge and ID. "Here's my ID," he stated, his voice firm but not aggressive. The officer checked the badge for a few seconds, then, "I don't care about this badge," tossed it back with a sneer. Identity is not something you could purchase at Lena's souvenir shop. She closed her breath quickens in her mounting wrath. "What did you just say?" she almost yelled, but Luke promptly placed. Lena stayed still, his hand on her shoulder soothing her. He spoke gently, though inside his own fury was boiling. The officer kept staring at Luke, his eyes full of contempt. "I won't ask again. We'll take genuine ID instead." Luke knew exactly what was ahead if he disobeyed. Otherwise, he had seen too many circumstances like this before. With no other option, he grabbed his driver's license and turned it over to the officer. Here noted his tone now was colder and looked at my legal ID. The license was then thrown back to Luke with disdain. "We still haven't received any confirmation from the hotel thus till." Lena couldn't handle it anymore. "We asked your family to leave this location." She moved toward the officer, her voice strong and relentless enough. "We are visitors here, and if you keep pestering, we are not going anywhere. My family will ensure you pay for this. What you are doing is completely illegal, and I will bring this up with the public." The officer stood still, seas sparkling with defiance. "Who do you?" "I'm a lawyer." "So you are threatening us?" Like Lena stood up, confronting the police without any trace of fear. "I won't let this go. Your spouse is a federal agent, and you have made a serious mistake treating us this way." Unnoticed, a tense calm enveloped the pool area. Patrons surrounding started paying even more attention, whispers spreading. A few visitors had already begun recording from a distance, and the tension in the air grew more stifling everywhere. Luke looked at Lena, his heart heavy with worries about his family's safety. The situation was escalating out of hand, and he understood that one mistake may cause everything to get worse. Beyond repair, seconds later, the younger cop, the one who had been testing them from the beginning, moved forward, Luke ripping off his restraints. "Put your hands behind your back. We will use force." Luke stayed motionless, his eyes now full of resolve and peace. "You are making a major error," he remarked, his voice gentle but tinged with a faint threat as he stood squarely facing the cop walking toward. With the cuffs in that moment, memories from the past seemed to be an unstoppable flow. Rushed back, overloading his memory, Luke recalled his early years as a fresh FBI agent who had gone through several perilous circumstances, fighting up with deadly criminals, and maintained mental clarity throughout the tensest situations, but never felt so helpless as he did just now. All his life, years of service to his nation, of defending national security, seemed small in comparison to the injustice his family was presently going through. Appeared in his memory as a case from 5 years ago, following his inquiry into police violence. Luke had then been the main investigator in a case where the police had unlawfully fired and murdered an unarmed man. Black young people he spoke with examined hundreds of pieces of evidence and found a terrible truth. What had transpired was deliberate abuse of power Luke possessed, not a mistake. Battled to get justice for the victim, but he never dreamed he would be the victim one day. Very system he examined at Lena, his wife, who had always been strong in every legal conflict Lena engaged in, had always made her proud of her efforts upholding the rights of the underprivileged groups, but here she wasn't the attorney defending someone else. That hurt Luke more than anything. She was the wife defending her spouse. Neither did he want Lena to go through, nor for their children to see a spectacle that ought never to have happened. Remembering the several times he had spent as the officer raised the cuffs preparing to lock them around Luke's wrists. Over his tenure, arrested real dangerous criminals, he had also eliminated domestic terrorists and drug dealers. But now here he was a guy who had battled nonstop to defend his nation from criminal treatment merely because, given his appearance and unfair mistrust, other terrible memories washed in Luke. Remembered the first time he and Lena had to teach Jackson about racism. At the time, Jackson was just 10 years old, but he had. Saw how different people regarded their family. Why do they continue to stare at us in the same, Jackson had asked. Perplexed, Luke had set him down, attempting to explain as plainly as possible. But the sorrow in his heart was difficult to mask. He knew that whatever he said would not shield his kid from. Jackson was older now, yet Luke could still see the uncertainty and concern on his son's face. The hard fact persisted always. Standing close by with curious eyes, the lad tried to understand what Emily, Luke's younger daughter, was doing. Luke felt his eyes full of tears, terror filling the eyes of both youngsters and her closely clinging mother. His heart tightened. He couldn't let his children grow up knowing their father was in handcuffs, handled like a. And in those times, Luke also considered his black FBI coworkers, who had told many stories to him regarding being suspected or hauled over by the police simply because their vehicles did not look correct at luxury stores just based on skin tone. When Luke had heard these tales, he always thought he may contribute to the creation of a more fair society via his profession, but just now he was dealing with a very. Taking a long breath and reminding himself to remain calm, he had always imagined he could fight against Luke under more demanding circumstances than this, but never had he been so profoundly wounded, not physically but emotionally. He knew that if he objected or shown any symptoms of noncompliance, this would escalate rapidly, and it could endanger his family. The young officer, ignorant of the mental storm whirling in Luke's head, he only saw a black man in front of him, sparkled with rebellion as though waiting for Luke to object so he might employ force. All fine, Luke replied softly, placing his hands behind his back. He simply saw a will to stay calm for his back, not any sign of submission. Family sensed the cold metal of the cuffs locking around his wrists and simultaneously observed the panic in Emily's eyes. Choking sobbing filled his ears. Jackson froze his face. Luke tried to soothe his children with a kind glance, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty and sadness. Though inside the flames of wrath blazed furiously, he knew his endurance today was for his family, but he vowed this was not the end. He might stay silent today, but what happened later would not be greeted with silence. When Lena felt a spike of lightning run through her, awakening all the while the cop snapped the cuffs onto Luke's wrists. Resentment that had been building for so long, the picture of her husband, a man who had bravely opposed hazardous. Lena had remained quiet long enough now that criminals were being treated like a regular criminal made her anger boil. Longer wished to remain composed. She strode fast toward the officer carrying Luke, her eyes flashing with enough fury. Lena yelled, her voice across the water, and the people who had been silently observing now concentrated just still on their phones, documenting. What the devil do you think you're doing? You realize you're cuffing a federal agent, and the young officer raised up his eyes from his hands, blazing with defiance and displeasure. Ma'am, if you fail to back down, we'll have. Lena went more closer, not stopping to hold you as well. You have no right to hold me simply for sticking up for my family. You are treating my husband like a criminal before our kids, and I won't permit the senior police to overlook this. One who had kept a cool face moved forward to block Lena. Ma'am, simply doing our job. The husband was not following our instructions. Lena let out a cold, bitter laugh. Doing your job is your duty to harass a legitimate family, to arrest an innocent guy merely based on his skin tone. I will show you what justice seems to be. A lawyer, and I know our rights the instant you touched my spouse without a good cause. The elder officer, who seemed to understand the situation was getting out of control, looked at you breaking the law. Looking at the expanding cow, some of the visitors had started filming more candidly. and their negative murmurs permeated the air. He realized that if this carried on, it would soon get social media viral. But the young, hot-headed police still seemed to not understand the gravity of the circumstances. He kept his stubborn posture. "We have the authority to demand legitimate identification." Hence, he did not cooperate. Right. Distant, and that's plenty for us to act. Lena couldn't hold back anymore. She walked squarely in front of the young officer, her eyes locked on his without fear. "I told you straightforwardly that you ignored that hubby is a federal agent. Do you know what I mean? Not only about breaking the law, but you also damaged my children." Jackson, who was standing close with wide eyes, struggling to. Lena understood everything going around him. Emily was hiding behind her and in that instant Lena recognized. She was not just enraged for Luke, but also for their children, as they deserved not to see their father being unfairly shackled like this. Or did they deserve to grow up fearing their parents, maybe snatched away? Merely because of a different skin tone. "You believe I should remain quiet while my husband is being abused this way?" Lena kept her voice getting more powerful with every phrase. "You could imagine myself supporting my kids through this humiliation. You will pay for what you have done. I will do everything to highlight the matter for the audience." Their whispers grew louder around them. The visitors shooting the event stopped still and instead started candidly discussing the injustice Lena was witnessing, and she could sense her support growing from the onlookers, and that just strengthened her determination. The young officer still seemed to not grasp the seriousness of the scenario, but the older officer started to get more concerned. Looking around at the phones kept high in the disapproving stares from the audience, then turned back to Luke, still in chains but oddly calm. He understood that if this wasn't handled well, "I advise you to cool off, since the subject could explode on social media in a few hours, ma'am, or we would be compelled to act more forcefully," the younger cop threatened. Yet his voice had lost some. Lena stood erect, her eyes jabbing through him as though her first confidence were. She was questioning the entire planet I live on. "I am peaceful, but if you do not release my spouse right now." At that instant, everything appeared to stop, "and I will translate this into your worst dream." The audience grew quiet, their eyes fixed tightly on the standoff Lena, and the officer stood still, steely glance. The senior officer saw the danger of the circumstances and turned back to his squad, meeting the mounting uneasiness on his face, and silently gave the young officer adequate release. He hesitated for a few seconds, then grudgingly pulled out the key to unlock Luke's wrist. As Luke raised his hands, rubbing his wrist still, the cuffs clicking open, he stayed quiet attitude, but Lena sensed his building rage. "And ready yourself to," Lena answered, "for every action you have done." Her eyes never left the police as the shackles dropped from Luke's wrists. Were not only Lena's but Jackson and Emily's as well. She sighed in relief. Their two children also sensed the change in the environment, but the moment brought more bewilderment than instant protection. And discomfort enveloped the children, something neither Luke nor Lena could miss. Jackson, with his wide, bewildered eyes, could not believe what he had just seen. His powerful, happy father, a federal agent he respected and trusted totally, but now the lad had just witnessed his father shackled like a felon, handled disrespectfully for no apparent cause in his young mind. Jackson was attempting to figure out why this was occurring. Should he be worried about it perhaps occurring once more? If Jackson walked over to Luke, his eyes full of disappointment and uncertainty. "Dad, what? Why did they treat you differently? You did nothing wrong." His voice shook as he battled to control the hurt and rage. Luke crouched down to be on eye level with Jackson, looking for the correct words to convey without triggering. "Jackson's son more suffers. Sometimes people fail to understand others and they act on mistaken presumptions." Luke gently rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "But what matters most is that those folks define us or our family. I did nothing illegal, and we'll make sure those who did will experience the repercussions." Jackson still couldn't quite understand. He dropped his head, his gaze down on the ground, his lips securely closed as he considered what his father had just spoken. Lena, meantime, stood immediately behind them, staring closely at father and son, knowing Jackson had been profoundly influenced by what had just happened, and she knew the lad would not see the world with the same vision going forward. Emily's younger daughter was still clinging to her mother, while tears flowed down her cheeks. She was innocent. "Mommy, is Daddy all right?" Her small voice quivered, gentle but strong. She harmed him. Of terror, her small hands were still clutching her mother's need for shelter from a world that had lately turned. Too weird and horrible, Lena knelt next to Emily, dragging her daughter into a close hug while running her curly hair. Though her own resentment still burned inside Daddy's spine, Darling murmured in the softest voice she could manage. "And we'll get through this together." Emily hugged tightly to her mother, but Lena could feel the shaking in her. The things Lena's kid had just seen would surely leave a mark on her young body. Lena's heart ached as she considered what her daughter had to go through, something no child should ever have to see. Luke saw. Emily's eyes revealed panic, and at that same instant his heart sank. He had always tried to shield his family from circumstances like this, but today he had been pulled into an injustice and made his children see it. For a father, there is no suffering more than seeing his children terrified by circumstances. Beyond his influence, the gathering surrounding him kept murmuring, the whispers increasing. Some guests kept filming while others observed with startled and sympathetic faces. Though it had not completely disappeared, the stress of the circumstances was now replaced by emptiness and tiredness. Lena rose up in the Parker household and turned to face the gathering of still-standing police. Her voice was no longer loaded with the wrath from past, but with a resolute, "Well, what you have done is unacceptable. I will not let you leave here without bearing the penalties. We will see justice." Luke, tired, rose up and fixed his eyes on the young officer who had unfairly cuffed him. "We won't merely fight for our own justice," he replied firmly, his voice calm but strong. "We'll battle for everyone else who has had to deal with this type of prejudice, including the previous hesitant elder officer." Now still, his head dropped. He realized the incident had spiraled out of control and the repercussions would not be readily deleted. The glances from the audience, the phone still recording, and Lena's words of warning had obviously made. He understood how severe the matter had gotten. Jackson and Emily, still too young to really grasp everything, but old enough to comprehend the injustice and suffering their family had recently experienced, would carry this recollection with them for a long period. Luke, knowing with heavy heart, he realized that he wasn't the only one who would have to deal with the aftermath from this occurrence, but he also knew that whatever Lena turned to Luke, her standing to defend them and guarantee that this injustice would not be carried on. Eyes full of, "Will we not stop here? We will fight this all the way," she whispered. "Yes." Luke nodded, his eyes reflecting the same determination Lena stood for, not stopping. Her eyes soared over the officials and resort staff, no longer hesitant or. Now all she could think about was how to get this event front and center. They couldn't let this go unreported. And they most definitely wouldn't let what had happened to them go unpunished. She retrieved her phone from her pocket and promptly phoned a colleague at her law office. Lena, a well-known attorney focusing in defending the rights of people living in underprivileged areas, she encountered incidents of power abuse and prejudice like this previously, but never considered her own family would suffer. Her voice was strong as she started momentarily outlining the scenario involving her colleague, urging them to begin laying the legal foundation for the case. "Ella, I need you for," Lena stated over the phone, "pacing the pool area. We were just walking around, starting gathering everything from this case straight now. Harassed by the police at the resort without any legal justification. Luke was shackled in front of our children. I wanted." Lena spoke with her colleague, the senior officer, who may help her to sue the resort as well as the police. Had asked Luke to have his handcuffs taken off so he could try to defuse the. "Ma'am," his tone was less strict than it had been before, "I know this has had a bad scenario, and we will be looking inside." Lena gazed at him, her eyes full of hope. "You can cool off and help us to handle this quietly." "Contempt, you crossed a boundary," she answered, her voice icier. "Police officers have embarrassed and traumatized my family. Now, there is no rest. You will be held responsible in court. We won't stop until this injustice is made public." "All right." She hung up the telephone and turned back to meet the police. Her demeanor remained resolute. You can get ready for A. Everything that transpired here has been documented, hence I will ensure that police justice is rendered. Public lawsuit. Could not suppress the concern on his face as he looked about at the still observing audience, knowing Lena was not just producing empty threats. Given everything that had happened, this was bound to become a serious issue if not properly managed. Not only were passersby with their phones still filming witnesses, but they were also the tools used to disseminate this narrative far abroad. Meanwhile, Luke, though finally free from the cuffs, did not take his eyes off the young officer who had cocked him, knowing all too well that in this system people like that officer often established ways to safeguard one another from misuse of authority. Like this was covered away or dismissed, but this time Luke would do all he could to prevent that, since his family had suffered too much. From more injustice, we are not only defending our own justice, Luke said to the senior officer. His voice was calm but firm. We are doing this for everyone else who has ever had to deal with. The elder cop tried to keep his cool, but it was obvious he was nervous about what was approaching. I will forward this up the chain and ask for an internal inquiry, he stated, but his remarks looked hollow to the Parker family. Lena approaching the hotel reception counter. She was now sure on her next target. The resort's administration directly phoned the police and engaged in harassment of her family, and they too would have to deal with the legal fallout we would want to discuss. Lena, the manager, told the receptionist straightforwardly, her voice leaving no space for rejection. Agitated rapidly, contacted the manager in a few minutes. A middle-aged man with a worried look bowed slightly to Lena and Luke, but his eyes revealed his uncertainty. Hello, I am the manager of the resort. I know there was an incident. I truly regret any misinterpretation Lena caused no time ago. Stepping forward, cutting him off before he could speak more. This was not a misinterpretation. This was plain prejudice, and you will answer for phoning the police to harass us without any justifiable cause. I would like to know which rules of this resort let you treat us this way? The manager stammered, looking at me for an explanation, but under Lena's keen eye in the observing audience, his remarks lost significance. We are really rather. Lena wasn't moved. Apologies. We will review to make sure events like this never occur once more. Not enough. We will be launching a public case, hence you will have to pay penalties. I will make sure this event is reported to justice, and what occurred to my family won't be forgotten. Luke stood beside Lena. Though they both knew they would be in for a protracted legal fight, their chilly demeanor toward the manager also reflected there. Knew they wouldn't be alone at that time. The hotel door flew open, and a man headed in with a number of others. In a police uniform, his commanding posture left his face inscrutable. It was Deputy Chief Paulson, a well-known person from police department public events and local news conferences. Luke knew right away the man with more authority than the police who had tormented his family near the pool. Deputy Chief Paulson strode rapidly approaching the group his eyes were looking at, the resort manager and the young police. I'm Deputy Chief Paulson. I stood uncomfortably close to Lena and Luke. Briefed on the matter, I would like to know exactly what transpired. His voice was strong but professional. His eyes fell on Luke and found no astonishment in him when he discovered an FBI agent standing before him. Luke moved forward coolly toward the FBI deputy head, Luke Parker. Agent, my family was unfairly harassed by your police, and I was shackled in front of my wife and children. We are legal visitors to this resort for no other reason than incorrect presumptions, hence I want an answer. Paulson nodded gravely, listening carefully, then turned to the senior officer for the discriminating acts made against us. This exact Paulson had been there from the start, hesitantly standing beside his younger colleagues. Questioned his tone, leaving no room for apologies. The elder officer hesitated, attempting to keep his cool. Deputy Chief, we were merely following process, as we couldn't instantly confirm Mr. Parker's information. We never meant to offend or insult, but prior to the officer could completion. Paulson interrupted, his eyes narrowing with disgust. Processes one thing, but disrespecting a legitimate family like Wei, especially when you know they were visitors, is another. He turned around to face Luke and Lena, my tone growing more somber. I'm sorry. We shall start an early inquiry for what happened. Those engaged in this incident will be held responsible. This is about the honor of the whole department, not only about police behavior. Lena, standing next to Luke, turned squarely toward Paulson, unmoved by the official apologies. And apologizing won't make the humiliation we just went through go away. This is not the first time such discriminatory policies have happened. You say you look into, but I'm looking for specific schedules and ideas. Not allowing this finale to be marked by hollow promises. Paulson nodded, his face still unchanged. I know, ma'am. WEC works with our internal affairs department to do open and honest. I will personally supervise the inquiry. All those engaged will be questioned should there be any infractions. They will follow the law. Luke examined Paulson closely, looking for indications of sincerity. He had heard many promises from the system he had worked for years, but now as a victim of that very system. Though he wasn't sure whether he could trust its openness longer, he realized the important now was to keep the pressure on. That's not enough, Luke stated with a strong voice. I want to make sure the incident doesn't go under the brush, that the officials who misuse their authority are held responsible. Beyond that, I will be bringing this up with higher authorities, not only inside the police agency, but also at the federal level. Paulson nodded, his eyes flashing momentarily, as though he realized the seriousness of the matter. So, everything will be taken care of correctly and fairly, and should you have any statements or proof, I urge you to help. Lena looked at Luke, then turned back to Paulson. To certain justice is done. Have a lot of proof. Whatever the people around us have noted has been documented, and I wouldn't hesitate to use it should this resort, as well as your police agency, will answer to the law. Paulson didn't dispute. He knew the Parker family wouldn't be readily frightened or played with promises. I will wait for your information. In the meantime, I advise the relevant police to report right away on there. Thank you for clarifying the matter, Paulson mentioned. Then, looking at the young officer, his tone. Landon enters feeling colder and reports all that has happened. The young officer Landon, who had arrested Luke without cause, looked with less of the rebellious attitude than before. Fast at Luke and Lena, then lowered his head and discreetly returned inside the hotel to follow his superior's directives as Paulson directed the officials to release the tension around. Luke and Lena stood there, the pool area still tangible, eyes of the crowd still observing individuals. Muttered to one another. The filming had stopped, but their concern and wrath had not abated. They knew the narrative was not over, and the truth would shortly out. Luke stared at Lena, a sensation of, "We have won the first round." Relief and tiredness rush over him. He gently spoke, his voice filled with, "Yes, determination is great." Nevertheless, Lena nodded, her eyes still full with resolution. Luke knew she was right. The events would not finish with the pledges of Deputy Chief Paulson or the officers withdrawing from the scene. This was only the start of a protracted struggle for justice, guaranteeing that none else must go through what they did. The silent audience around and the recording cameras just enhanced Luke and Lena's will drove the pair back to their children. Jackson still seemed perplexed, but his eyes now held respect for the fortitude with which his parents confront the injustice Emily kept holding to. Mother had stopped crying, but her eyes still betrayed signs of terror. Lena hugged children tightly, her voice subtle but firm. "We worked through this together," she murmured softly, brushing Emily's hair. Luke stood beside them. His would not be let treat us like that again. Eyes soft as he gazed at his children, but he couldn't suppress the subdued will he knew was inside of him. This fight was for everyone else who had experienced comparable injustice, as well as for his family. It was time to stand, not only to safeguard his own, but also those of others as they prepared. The resort manager, who had seen the whole episode, dashed across the pool area, clearly agitated. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, we really regret what happened. We never meant for this and will take complete responsibility for," he replied, his voice full of concern. "The resort will totally cover your whole stay. We make sure no." Lena, unmoved by the apologies and offer of additional events like this compensation, answered angrily, "Money cannot undo what we had gone through. We need justice. We will make sure you face it. We do not need a free vacation." The manager of the resort lowered his head, saying nothing more since he knew he could not help to calm the rightful wrath. Looking at Luke and nodding slightly, the Parker family went away. Lena had a clear idea now, and nothing would cause them to stop moving toward the front desk to depart the resort. Jackson pulled on Luke's clothing, revealed a curious and slightly worried tone. For Dad, what? Will everything be good now? Luke knelt down and laid a hand on his son's shoulder, and gently but firmly, we will fight, Jackson. Everything will be fine because we won't give up. We will help to make the world fair, not just for our family, but also for... Lena stood beside him. Her eyes glowed with pride as she examined Luke and their kids. That are right. We'll make sure those accountable pay for their actions, and we won't stop here till the Parker family left the resort, hand in and stronger and more. Justice is rendered with those words. United than ever, they knew the path ahead would be full with difficulties, but they also knew they weren't alone in Luke's resolve, this struggle with Lena's legal knowledge, their family's unwavering devotion. They would go on their battle for justice. The fight might not be finished, but they were ready for whatever came ahead, and thus, time they understood that the Parker family's path would not be solely a reflection of injustice and discrimination, account of facing injustice, but evidence of the bravery and will to oppose, prejudge, to uphold the rights of others and oneself. By means of their narrative reminds us that justice does not come from silence. Occasionally we have to get up and fight for the truth, not only for ourselves but for a more equal society for all, which presents difficulties. Parker family reminds us, all of us, not to be silent always when confronted with injustice. See the strength of family love and unity. With tenacity and bravery, we can shape the future. If you found this, then we are establishing a society that everyone is treated equally regardless of background, gender, or color. Stories significant and wish to help us disseminate these vital principles. Kindly subscribe to our channel to avoid. Together, we can create a strong community full of compassion and a feeling of inspiration by missing the next one. Justice. Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.